On the morning of May 9th, 1864, a Union general stood in the open at Spotsylvania and smiled at the men ducking around him. The enemy was too far away, he thought. No bullet could touch him from there. Then came a sharp, strange whistle through the air. A second later, Major General John Sedgwick fell with a bullet under his eye, and one impossible shot turned laughter into shock across the whole battlefield forever.
Stay with me, because this is not just a battlefield story. It is the moment courage met a colder future. By the spring of 1864, John Sedgwick had already lived the kind of military life that made men trust him without needing speeches. He had graduated from West Point in 1837, served in the Seminole War, fought in Mexico, and built a reputation for steadiness that followed him into the Civil War. In the Army of the Potomac, he became one of the most respected commanders in the field. His soldiers called him Uncle John, and the name fit. He was calm when others were shaken, plain when others were grand, and brave in a way that felt natural instead of theatrical. He had been wounded before, had seen enough battle to know what fear looked like, and still kept close to the front, where men could see him and settle themselves by his presence. By 1864, he commanded the 6th Corps, and to the men around him, he did not look temporary. He looked like one of the fixed things in a war that kept destroying fixed things. But while Sedgwick was rising through the old world of soldierly courage, another force was rising far from Virginia in workshops, foundries, and test ranges. It came from Sir Joseph Whitworth, a British engineer known for precision, measurement, and mechanical discipline. Whitworth looked at the standard rifles of his day and believed they could be made more accurate. The rifle that carried his name was slimmer than the heavy muskets most Civil War soldiers knew, built around a smaller .451 caliber bore and an unusual polygonal, hexagonal-style rifling system that gave it a fearsome reputation at long range. It was expensive, rare, and never common enough to decide the whole war. It also fouled badly and demanded care. Still, in skilled hands, it could do something deeply unsettling for its time. It could reach far enough to make the distance feel unsafe. That look became part of the story. The Whitworth did not seem brutal at first glance. It seemed fine-made, almost elegant, too refined for the mud and chaos of a battlefield. A man could mistake it for a sporting arm, a target rifle, something built for display and precision rather than killing. That was the hidden danger in it. The deadliest changes in war do not always arrive looking monstrous. Sometimes they arrive looking cleaner, smarter, and more controlled than the age around them. Confederate buyers managed to bring a small number of Whitworth rifles into the South, and because they were scarce, they were often placed where they could matter most, in the hands of trained sharpshooters told to watch officers, artillerymen, and any target worth a long, patient shot. The rifle's strange, shrill report became part of its reputation. Men noticed it because it did not sound like the rest. Before many soldiers understood what the weapon was, they understood what it could do. By then, the war itself had become a machine for punishing old assumptions. In early May 1864, Ulysses S. Grant drove the Army of the Potomac into the Overland Campaign, a relentless push against Robert E. Lee in Virginia. The Battle of the Wilderness came first, a choking, brutal fight in tangled woods where command broke down and men burned where they fell. After that bloodletting, both armies raced toward Spotsylvania Courthouse, a key crossroads.
Lee's army reached it first and dug in. The Confederate line bent around strong ground near Laurel Hill. Union forces came up hard against defenses that were difficult to break and easy to die in front of. Sedgwick's VI Corps moved into that pressure with the rest of the army, and on May 9th, the fighting had not yet become the full nightmare Spotsylvania would later be, but the danger was already there in the air. Batteries were being placed, lines were being adjusted, sharpshooters were active. Men were being hit in places that did not feel like the front, because in a new kind of war, the front had grown longer than sight and stranger than instinct. This is where the deeper crack opens under the whole story. Sedgwick belonged to an older military code. A general was supposed to be seen. He steadied men by staying visible under pressure. He showed control by refusing to flinch. That way of command had carried real value for generations. Men fought better when they believed the officer near them shared the same danger. Sedgwick had earned that faith honestly. He was not pretending to be fearless. He had simply spent his life in an army where courage still had a physical shape. Stand firm, stay mounted, be seen. But technology had begun to turn that very strength into weakness. Rifles were reaching farther. Marksmen were becoming more deliberate. A commander who exposed himself was no longer inspiring only his men. He was also offering a calm, valuable target to someone patient enough to wait for him. The old battlefield had not disappeared all at once. That was the cruel part. It still looked familiar enough to trust. Officers still rode the lines. Men still judged danger by habits learned from earlier fights. Yet inside that familiar world, the rules were changing. Precision had started to outrun tradition. Distance had started to defeat instinct. Sedgwick could not feel that shift in the way a later age would. Almost nobody could. He was moving through a battlefield that still wore the face of the old war while quietly becoming something else. By the morning of May 9, 1864, Confederate sharpshooters near Laurel Hill were already troubling the Union line, and Sedgwick, steady as ever, moved forward to supervise the placement of his men and guns, toward the exact stretch of ground where one rare rifle and one hidden marksman were about to test everything he believed.
What had started as a nuisance soon became something far worse. Along the Union line near Laurel Hill, Confederate sharpshooters kept men uneasy and off balance. Each passing round carried a sharp, ugly sound, and every time it cut through the air, soldiers lowered their heads a little faster. Work still had to be done, guns still had to be placed, orders still had to move, yet the field had changed. Danger was no longer only in the smoke ahead, it was also somewhere far off, hidden, patient, and watching. Sedgwick moved through all of it with the same calm that had made him so respected. He had spent too many years under fire to believe panic helped anyone, so when men around him kept flinching, he answered with steady confidence and a little scorn. That was his nature. He led by presence, by composure, by showing other men that fear could be mastered. Around him, officers had already seen enough to worry. Brigadier General William Morris had been wounded. Staff officers knew the range was long, yet they also knew somebody across that ground was shooting with frightening accuracy. Sedgwick still believed the threat was being overstated. Then came the remark that lived on after him, the one about not being able to hit an elephant at that distance. However, the words were remembered from man to man, and their meaning stayed the same. He thought the enemy was too far away to do real damage. A moment later, the battlefield proved otherwise. One shot struck him just below the left eye and killed him almost instantly. There was no time for rescue, no final command, no chance to turn the moment into something noble or controlled. One heartbeat, he was standing in the open, still the fixed point his men relied on. By the next, he was gone. What followed was shock in its rawest form. Sedgwick was more than a corps commander on paper. He was one of those rare officers whose presence seemed to steady everything around him. Men trusted him because he had earned that trust the hard way over years of war. Losing him in battle would have hurt under any circumstances. Losing him like this, from a distance that still felt unreal, struck with a different kind of force. It felt sudden, intimate, and deeply wrong. Even Grant had trouble believing it at first and reportedly asked if Sedgwick was really dead. That disbelief tells its own story. This was not the kind of death men expected for someone like him. It did not come in the middle of a grand charge or under crashing artillery. It came from far away, from a single hidden rifleman, with a precision that seemed to belong to another age. That is where the story began to slip into legend. People wanted a name for the man behind the shot. Over time, several names were offered. One popular claim pointed to Sergeant Grace of the 4th Georgia, another later claim named Benjamin M. Powell. Those stories spread because they gave shape to something so unsettling. A famous death feels easier to carry when it belongs to a clear killer. Yet once historians looked closely, certainty began to fall apart. Unit positions did not match neatly. Reported distances raised doubts. Some claims appeared years after the war, shaped by memory and pride more than firm proof. So the closer anyone got to the truth, the more it seemed to recede. What remains most likely is still powerful enough. Sedgwick appears to have been killed by a Confederate sharpshooter using a Whitworth rifle, or at least a similar long-range precision weapon, in the Laurel Hill sector on May 9, 1864. That conclusion fits the range, the reports from the field, and the strange whistling sound witnesses remembered. Even so, the exact shooter was never proved beyond doubt. That missing name gives the story its darkest edge. Sedgwick stayed in history. His final morning stayed in history. Even the rifle tied to the shot stayed in history. Meanwhile, the man who pulled the trigger faded back into trees, smoke, and rumor. Because of that, the wound never fully closed. It remained larger than one death. It became a sign that something had shifted in war itself. Rank still mattered. Bravery still mattered, experience still mattered, yet none of it could save a man once distance and precision began to work together. On that field at Spotsylvania, an older idea of command met a colder reality and lost. Worse still, this was only one death in a battle that had not finished taking what it came to take.
By evening, the army had already absorbed the loss and kept moving, because that is what war does to grief. Another officer stepped in, orders kept flowing, and the killing at Spotsylvania only deepened. Within days, thousands more would fall in places like the Mule Shoe, where the fighting turned savage and close enough to feel almost medieval. Sedgwick's death mattered deeply to the men who knew him, yet the campaign gave them little time to sit with it. That is part of what makes this story so bitter. A man admired across the army vanished in a second, and the machine of war rolled forward as if sorrow were just another weight to drag behind it. Over time, memory did what memory often does. It polished the scene into something sharp and simple, a famous line, a fatal shot, a cruel twist of fate. That version survives because it feels complete. The truth is harsher. What happened that morning was not just a dramatic irony, it was a warning. By 1864, skill, range, and technology were changing the rules faster than tradition could keep up. Sedgwick stood inside an older idea of command, where a leader steadied men by showing himself. Across the field, a newer kind of power was already waiting, one that cared nothing for reputation, courage, or years of service. People later tried to pin the shot to a single Confederate marksman, and several names were offered over the years. None can be proved with certainty. That missing certainty matters. It means the story does not end with a clean answer or a famous duel between two men. Instead, it leaves behind something colder, a rare rifle, a hidden shooter, and a death so exact that history still feels the chill of it. The name most people remember is Sedgwick's. The name attached to the weapon is Whitworth's. The man who fired stays just beyond reach. In a way, that is the final truth this story leaves behind. Modern war was beginning to erase the old shape of heroism. Distance was growing. Precision was improving. A commander could do everything the honorable way and still be removed before he fully understood the danger. That does not make bravery meaningless. It makes it tragic. It reminds us that human beings often keep trusting the world they grew up in, even after the world has changed beneath their feet. Sedgwick died on a field where the future had already arrived, though it still looked far enough away to laugh at. That is why the story lingers. One shot killed a general, but what it really buried was the last comfort of believing experience alone could save you from what comes next.